topic, which is the limit of exponential function. Paano nga ba natin kukunin yung limit ng exponential function? Okay, so the objective of this topic is to compute the limits of exponential functions using table of values and also the graph. Pag-usapan naman natin yung mga rule or laws regarding your exponent. For any constant a is greater than 0 and b is also greater than 0, and for all x and y, meron tayong limang rules lamang para sa exponent. The first law is power with the same base, that is b to the x power times the b to the y power is equal to b times the sum of your two exponent, that is power with the same base. Second, we have the quotient with same base, that is b raised to x over b raised to y is equal to b raised to the difference of your two exponent. The third law is power to power. We have b raised to x times y is equal to b raised to the product of x and y. The fourth law is a product to a power. That is ab to the x power is equal to a raised to x times a b raised to x. And the last law is the quotient to a power, that is a raised to x over b raised to x. In this case naman, magkakaiba yung base natin. Isa a, isa b. That is equal to the x power of a over b. So we need to remember these laws of exponent kasi magagamit natin siya to find the limit of your exponential function. So in an exponential functions, meron siyang dalawang form. Either y is equal to p raised to x, na kung saan yung p natin is greater than 0 and b which is not equal to 1. So ito yung mga graph nila. So yung nasa left part, this is the graph of function is equal to b raised to x, na kung saan yung p natin or the base is less than 1 but greater than 0. Kumbaga, yung values ng p natin is in between 0 and 1. And we can have also yung nasa right, ito naman graph ng exponential function natin na kung saan yung b natin is greater than 1. Okay? And then the limit of the graph ng nasa left, meron tayong dalawa. Limit of your exponential function habang yung x natin is papalapit sa positive infinity, and that is equal to 0. And the limit of your function as x approaches to negative infinity is equal to infinity. Later, ipapakita natin gamit yung table of values kung bakit yung limit ng function natin habang yung x approaches to positive infinity becomes 0, while the limit of your function as your x approaches negative infinity is an infinity. Then, we have also the limit of the graph wherein b is greater than 1. Here, we have limit of your exponential function as x approaches infinity is equal to infinity, and if your x approaches negative infinity, the limit is equal to 0. So, yung pinagkaiba dito is magkabaliktaran. Okay? So, habang yung x natin approaches to positive infinity, here, na kung saan yung b natin is in between of 0 and 1, its limit is equal to 0. While here naman, as x approaches infinity, na kung saan yung b natin is greater than 1, its limit is infinity. Ganun din yung case ng x approaches negative infinity. Example, kunin natin yung limit ng function natin, which is 2 raised to x as x approaches 3. Kung gagamit tayo ng direct substitution, that is lahat ng x magiging 3, our function becomes 2 raised to 3, and that is equal to 8. And that is the limit of your 2 raised to x as x approaches 3. That is 8. Another example, we have limit of 2 raised to the sum of x and 5 as x approaches to negative 5. Ito, pwede tayong gumamit ng direct substitution automatically para makuha natin yung limit ng ating exponential function. That is 2 raised to negative 5 plus 5. Then simplify natin, negative 5 plus 5 is equal to 0. And 2 raised to 0 is equal to 1. Any number raised to 0 except 0 is equal to 1. So that is the limit of your function. About if our x approaches to positive infinity and negative infinity. paano natin makukuha yung limit ng function natin, which is exponential function. Let's say, for example, we will evaluate the limit of 2 raised to x as x approaches positive infinity. So here, titingnan na natin yung value ng b natin. Okay? Kung in between ba siya ng 0 and 1 or less than 1 siya. In our case, b is equal to 2. Ito yung base ng exponential function natin. And we conclude that b is greater than 1. Then, yung limit ng function natin as x approaches positive becomes infinity. That's the answer. Another example, paano naman pag negative infinity? So we have here our function 0.5 raised to x. Kukunin natin yung limit niya as x approaches negative infinity. So here, we will check, okay, kung ano yung value ng b natin. So b here is 0.5, our base is 0.5, and we all know that 0.5 is less than 1. Mababa siya sa 1. Nasa pagitan siya ng 0 and 1. Then we can conclude that the limit of that function as x approaches negative infinity is equal to positive infinity. Pero dito kanina, sa first example natin, kung yung b naman natin is less than 1 or greater than 0, in between siya ng 0 to 1, then your x is also approaching to positive infinity, then the answer here is 0. Ito naman sa kabila, nasa baba, if b is greater than as x approaches to negative infinity, the answer is 0 also. Another example. Evaluate the limit of 4 raised to the sum of negative x and 3 as x approaches to negative infinity. So here, una natin gagawin, we will apply the different laws of exponent. Kasi yung exponent natin is a combination of your variable and numbers na. So we need to separate those exponents. Balikan natin yung mga laws of exponent. Pipili tayo dito kung saan yung nakangkop na gamitin. Again, we have 5 laws of exponent. We have the power with the same base, quotient with the same base, power to power, product to a power, and quotient to a power. Tingnan natin yung function natin. We have 4 raised to negative x plus 3. We have the same base, which is 4. So yung gagamitin natin dito is either 1, 2, or 3. Ito lang yung angkop sa function natin. Tingnan naman natin yung exponent. We have negative x plus 3. So, the applicable laws of exponent na meron tayo is the number 1. We will apply the law of exponent, which is power with the same base. So, anong mangyayari dito? So, this 4 raised to negative x plus 4 is the same as b raised to x plus y. Hahatiin natin yung exponent, then the function becomes ganito. B raised to x times b raised to y. Thus, we have, okay, ito na yung mangyayari, 4 raised to negative x plus 3. Using law of exponent, hiwalay na natin yung negative x. We get 4 raised to negative x multiply by 4 raised to 3 or 4 cubed. And then simplify na natin. This is, ito, hinatin natin, finactor natin. We get 4 raised to negative 1 times x. Then times 4 raised to 3. Yung ginawa ko dito is that kailangan nating i-maintain yung exponent as positive. Once negative siya, we need to factor those exponent. Then find the value of x which is positive. So in this case, ito na yung magiging mukha niya. 4 raised to negative 1 times x. Then simplify na natin. Lahat ng number or variable that contains negative exponent, magiging fraction siya. That is, 4 raised to negative 1 is also the same as 1/4. Then copy lang yung x. And then simplify yung 4 cubed, that is 4 times 4 times 4 or 64. So instead of this function, ito na yung gagamitin nating function. Rewrite na natin. So ulitin na natin. Here pala, we need to check the values of your b. Kasi meron tayong dalawang form of your exponential function. Yung b natin dito is equal to 4, and we all know 4 is less than or greater than 4? Okay, greater than 1. So this is greater than 1. But again, we will not use this function. Ito yung functions ang gagamitin natin. So among these terms natin, we have 1/4x. Titingnan natin yung term na merong exponent. In this case, we have your 1/4 with an exponent x. So yung base natin dito is 1/4. Yung 1/4 ba greater than, equal to 1 or equal to 0? So 1/4 is less than 1 and greater than 0. So that means yung condition na gagamitin natin is ito, limit of your function as x approaches to negative infinity is equal to positive infinity. Ibig sabihin, yung magiging sagot dito ng limit ng 1/4 raised to x is equal to positive infinity. Then rewrite na natin. So again, instead of using this, we will use this expression. Again, pareho lang po yung value nila. So here, kunin natin yung limit of 1/4 raised to x as x approaches to negative 8, and we all know the answer is positive infinity. That is based on your condition kanina na makikita sa form ng ating exponential function, na kung saan yung b natin is less than 1 but greater than 0. Kasi nga yung b natin dito is 1/4. Then, multiplied by the limit of 64, we all know that the limit of constant is always constant. So, ito na yung limit ng 64, which is also 64. Then, simplify na natin, we have infinity multiplied by 64, and the answer is infinity. Take note that when you multiply a positive number to infinity, the result is always positive infinity. Thus, limit of your function as x approaches to negative infinity is equal to positive infinity. And this is the graph of your exponential function. So mapapansin natin dito na habang papalapit tayo sa negative infinity for the values of your x, habang yung x natin daw approaches to negative infinity, our f of x also approaches to positive infinity. Paakyat siya, so positive yung magiging limit ng function natin. And that is the limit of exponential function. Another one, let's say for example, evaluate the limit of 1/2 raised to the power of x minus 2 as x approaches to positive infinity naman. So again, titingnan natin muna, okay, kung ano yung mga pwede nating magamit ng loss of exponent here para ma-expand natin yung function natin. So here, so among the functions that we have, yung pinaka-applicable here is letter B. And that is quotient with the same base. Pareho lang yung base ng ating function, which is 1/2. Then the exponent, the operation of the exponent is difference. So, pag simplify natin siya further, magiging quotient with same base na siya. Yung magiging mukha ng ating function becomes ganito. 1/2 raised to x minus 2. So, si x, ibibigay na kay 1/2. Then, since hiniwalay natin, we will proceed to division. And then, yung 2 naman, ibibigay natin kay 1/2 also. This becomes 1/2 raised to x divided by the square of 1/2. Then simplify, we have 1/2 to the x power divided by 1/4. Now, titingnan natin yung value ng b natin dito. Yung reference natin dito is the exponential form of your expression. So, between 1/2 raised to x and 1/4, saan dito yung form? Which is b raised to x. That is your 1/2 raised to x. So, yung value ng base natin dito is equal to 1/2. Then, i-compare natin siya. So, what is 1/2? Less than ba siya ng 1 or greater than 1? 1/2 here as our base is less than 1, but greater than 0. Then, alam natin na yung limit ng function na yan as x approaches positive infinity is equal to 0. That includes that the value of this term is equal to 0. Then, okay, palitan na natin. Again, we will not use this function, but the expanded form of that function. That is, limit of 1/2 raised to x as x approaches to negative approaches to positive infinity, rather, divide by the limit of 1/4 as x approaches to positive infinity. Again, we all know that 1/2 raised to infinity yields to 0. So magiging 0 na yung value nito, then we will divide by 1/4, that results to 0. Hence, limit of our function as x approaches positive infinity is equal to 0. And this is the graph of your 1/2 raised to x minus 2. So habang papalapit daw tayo sa values ng x to positive infinity, okay, papunta tayong right, the f of x also approaching to 0. And 0 is the limit of your function. Ito na yung hangganan, ito na yung limit ng ating exponential function as x approaches infinity, which is equal to 0. Another one, we have medyo complex na ng konti. Evaluate the limit of the function as x approaches to positive infinity pa rin. So here, kung gagamit tayo ng limit lost by direct substitution, we will get ito, limit of 4 raised to x as x approaches 8, plus the limit of 3 raised to x as x approaches positive infinity. So yung limit law that governs here is the sum rule. Okay? Then we have also your quotient rule. For the denominator, we have limit of 2 raised to x as x approaches to positive infinity. Then, by substitution, we get 4 raised to infinity plus 3 raised to infinity over 2 raised to infinity. Any number raised to infinity yields to infinity. That becomes infinity plus infinity over infinity, or simply infinity over infinity, which makes it indeterminate. Katulad ng 0 divided by 0, infinity divided by infinity is also indeterminate. Ibig sabihin, meron tayong value but we don't know the exact value. So gagamit tayo ng ibang way pa para makuha natin yung estimated limit for our function. So here, we will divide by the highest power in the denominator. Para naman sa function natin, okay, we will expand the expression. So, para makakam up tayo ng limit which is not indeterminate. So, ano ang gagawin doon? We will divide by the highest power na makikita sa denominator only. Since our denominator is only 2 raised to x, yung gagawin natin dito is i-divide natin yung mga terms na makikita sa numerator and also to your denominator by 2 raised to x. And this becomes, so yung 4 raised to x, magdi-divide tayo ng 2 raised to x. Ganun din yung case na 3 raised to x, magdi-divide tayo ng 2 raised to x. At yung denominator natin, 2 raised to x divided by another 2 raised to x. Then simplify, 4 raised to x divided by 2 raised to x is 2 raised to x. 3 raised to x divided by 2 raised to x is 3 halves raised to x. At yung denominator natin becomes 1. Kasi 2 raised to x divided by 2 raised to x is simply 1. So instead of this function, ito na yung gagamitin nating function para makuha yung limit niya. That is, limit of 2 raised to x plus 3 halves raised to x over 1 as x approaches positive infinity. Recall lang natin na, we will recall, so titingnan natin, pag yung base natin, since our x approaches 0, meron tayong dalawang conditions here. Okay? Kung positive infinity yung x natin, then the limit is infinity. If x approaches to negative infinity, then the answer is 0. Since, in our case here, yung 2 raised to x, magiging positive infinity na siya. Kasi our x approaches to positive infinity. Then, yung 3 halves raised to x becomes your what? Your positive infinity also. Kasi nga, our x approaches to positive infinity. And your b here is greater than 1. 2 is greater than 1, and 3 halves is also greater than 1. So, ito yung conditions na gagamitin natin para makuha yung limit ng functions natin. Then, over 1. Then simplify, we get infinity plus infinity, and that is infinity. So the answer is simply infinity. Therefore, limit of the function as x approaches to infinity is equal to positive infinity. So dito, pag masyadong complex na yung function natin, balikan natin. Tingnan mo muna kung saan papunta yung values ng x nyo. Okay? If the values of your x approaches to positive infinity, may dalawa tayong posibleng limits doon. Isa is positive infinity, yung isa naman is 0. Titingnan nyo naman yung base ninyo. If your base is greater than 1, then the answer for that is positive infinity. Pero, kung yung base naman natin is less than 1 but greater than 0, then the limit of that function is equal to 0. Pag negative infinity naman yung approach ng x natin, may dalawa din tayong sagot doon. Yung isa, 0 if b is greater than 1. Yung isa naman magiging positive infinity if b is greater than 0 but less than 1. And this is the graph of your 4 raised to x plus 3 raised to x over 2 raised to x. So habang yung values ng x natin papalapit sa positive infinity, papuntang right, your f of x also approaches to positive infinity, paakyat ng y. And that is the limit of your function. Another example. Here, meron tayong existence of Euler's number, that is letter A. So, constant to. Katulad ng pi, which has an estimated value of 3.14. Yung E naman natin is also a rational number. Meron din siyang value. So, for the value of E, we have estimated 2.718281828. Again, katulad ng pi, yung Euler's number natin is also irrational. So, we have here, balikan natin yung function natin as x approaches to positive infinity. So, ganun pa rin yung case natin. Para hindi tayo makakame up ng indeterminate, we need to divide lahat ng terms, both numerator and denominator, by the highest exponent or by the highest power na makikita sa denominator. So, yung denominator natin nagko-contain ng dalawang term. Isa is 1 and the other is 3ex. So, yung magiging referral natin dito is ito lang, yung e raised to x. Kasi ito lang yung nag-hold ng exponent. Therefore, we will divide each term of your fraction by e raised to x. So, this is our function. Magdi-divide tayo again lahat ng expression by e raised to x. So, yung 1 magiging 1 divided by e raised to x plus yung e raised to x divide by e raised to x over, ito naman, magdi-divide din tayo ng e raised to x minus 3 e raised to x over e raised to x. Then, cancellation lang. Simplify lang natin. E raised to x over e raised to x is equal to 1. So, copy lang ito kasi hindi na siya mas-simplify further. Ito din, copy. Ito, pwede natin ma-cancel yung e raised to x para maiwan na lang si negative 3. Instead of this function, ito na yung function ang gagamitin natin to find the limit as x approaches to positive infinity. Same lang din naman sila. Then dito napapasok yung substitution. Yung x natin, papalitan natin ng positive infinity. Recall, if b is greater than 0 but less than 1, then the limit of your function, kung yung x natin approaches to infinity, that is 0. Tingnan natin yung x natin, it is approaching to positive infinity. So, ibig sabihin, yung magiging sagot is either 0 or positive infinity. Okay, positive infinity kung yung b naman natin is greater than 1. Tingnan naman natin yung value ng base natin. So, here our base is less than 1. Thus, ito yung conditions ang gagamitin natin. The limit of this is equal to 0. So, 1 over e raised to x becomes 0. Copy yung plus 1. Yung sa denominator naman, this becomes 0 then. Minus 3, then simplify, we will get negative 1/3. Thus, the limit of your function as x approaches to positive infinity is equal to negative 1/3. Another example. So, ganun pa rin yung way natin, okay, para ma-eradicate natin yung pagkakaroon ng indeterminate. we will divide lahat ng terms natin, both numerator and denominator, by the highest power na makikita sa denominator. Ito yung magiging reference natin, yung nasa baba ng fraction. Since yung nagdadala ng expression with the highest power is e raised to x, ibig sabihin magdi-divide tayo lahat ng term na nasa numerator natin at nasa denominator natin by e raised to x. So yung 3e raised to x, magiging 3e raised to x divided by e raised to x. So yung negative 1, magdi-divide din tayo ng e raised to x. Ganun din yung mangyayari sa denominator, divide by e raised to x, divide by e raised to x. Then simplify lang natin. This becomes 3, then copy. We have copy plus 2. Cancel yung e raised to x. So instead of using the limit, the function to find the limit of this as x approaches to positive infinity, ito na yung gagamitin natin kanina. Okay? And recall that, ito, yung b natin, so b is 1 over e, that results to what? b is greater than 0 but less than 1. In between yung sagot dyan sa 0 and 1. It is 1 divided by 2.718, diba? So the quotient is 0 point something, which is in between of, ito, 0 and 1. Since yung x natin approaches to positive infinity, yung magiging sagot niya is 0. So this becomes 0, and this becomes 0 also. So copy yung 3 minus 0, denominator becomes 0 plus 2, then simplify lang, we get 3 over 2. Thus, the limit of the function as x approaches positive infinity is equal to 3 halves, or that is 1 and 1 half. Graphically speaking, ito yung graph ng ating function. So kung mapapansin ninyo na habang palapit or papunta yung values ng x natin to positive infinity, yung magiging approach naman ng f of x is 3 halves. So hanggang dulo, ito na yung limit or hangganan ng function natin. That is 3 halves. For the final words, the only way to learn mathematics is to do mathematics.